Let's dive in and I'm excited to get ready. So we're going to talk about how to unlock major giving from Gen X in 2025. So why does this matter? It's my sense that this, as we think about the generations, we've talked about boomers, we've talked about Gen X, or we've talked about millennials. Now we're going to dive in on Gen X. I think this is the most important of the presentations on generations, in part because Gen X is the least studied, the least discussed, and a lot of giving sort of centered around boomers, and then a lot of people are thinking about millennials rising, and I think there's a lot of interesting insights around Gen X. Mary um, gets the rhinos question right. She says white rhinos is really just because of the word wide, which is there's an Afrikaner's word, which is something like wide. Um, their mouths are very wide. And then black rhinos are the opposite of white. And so they have sort of narrow mouths. So anyway, now you know that. Good question. What color is a white rhino is a great trivia question for you in the future. All right, before we get started, this event is approved for 1.0 CFRE credits. At the end of the session, we will drop a survey in the chat. Please fill that out. Thank you so much for doing that. Here's the agenda. I won't read it all out, but please know that we will send the recording and the slides around later today. When someone asks about that in the chat in 5 minutes, please do me a favor and just let them know. But we'll dive in on Gen X. We'll talk about some very specific takeaways you can use to make the most of this generation. Quick intros. My name is Patrick. I'm lucky to be the co-founder and co-CEO of FreeWill alongside Jenny, pictured here. Jenny is just wonderful. I am in Brooklyn, New York. Jenny is in Seattle, Washington with her beautiful family. And we are lucky to be part of a FreeWill team trusted by now 2,200 leading nonprofits, which is a little wild. It is the biggest planned giving solution in the United States, trusted by organizations like the Red Cross, Amnesty International, and so on and so forth. And this is our team. They're wonderful, they're kind, they're diverse, they're brilliant. We love working with them. Together, they've raised about $12 billion for charity and have more than 5 centuries of fundraising experience combined. So very cool. Abby says Brooklyn rocks, and I strongly agree. It was a beautiful morning. One of the things about coming back from South Africa is you often wake up at 4 in the morning. So I've had a big long day already. And Sarai says she loves Desiree, who you can see here. Desiree is one of our partner success strategists, and I agree. She is wonderful, like much of the rest of our team. You are also wonderful. And so as a thank you for joining, we are going to give away one of this really interesting book by Dr. Jean Twenge, excuse me, called Generations, which really studies the differences between the generations, how they interact. Really a great thing if you have people in your life that are not your generation, which many of you do. So make a note of this survey at the end of the chat. If you'd like a copy, we would love to send you one. And we're so grateful you're here. Alex says the book is fantastic, one of the best I've read over the past few years. So let's presume that Alex is an actual avid reader and he's not only read a few books. And it's great. Also, Andre says it's pronounced twangy, so that's on me. Apologies to Dr. Twangy. All right, here we go. How are you feeling? A lot of folks are feeling pretty good, not quite at the high of a few weeks ago. Maybe, we've gone through some hedonic adaptations of spring, and it's no longer the joy it was, but overall feeling good. And a little bit of a dip in expectations around goals, but not too significant. So we're not worried too much there as well. All right, we are going to dive in on Gen X. By the way, is anyone here? I'd be curious to know what generation folks here are. So just if you don't mind dropping it in the chat. We've got some Gen Xers, Lynn, Sarah. We've got some Zennials. Zennials are the cusp, millennials, Gen X, a lot of millennials, Gen X, some boomers, some Gen Z. Thank you for coming, Gen Z. Borderline boomers, unclear which border, millennial, geriatric millennials, Oregon Trail millennials. That's where I am. I'm an Oregon Trail millennial. So great. Okay, latchkey Gen Xers, we baby. All right, so let's dive in. Some shared facts. Born 1965 to 1980. Can anyone identify the alumni of the movie on the right? 1965 to 1980. In 2025, they are 45 to 60 years old. Thank you, people that are correctly identifying this as the cast of The Breakfast Club. Hey, everyone's growing up. This is what the cast of The Breakfast Club looks like maybe a year or two ago. Gen X is turning 60 this year. Holy cow. We are all getting older together. 45 to 60 years old. 65 million Americans are Gen X. There are 8 million fewer Gen X than millennials and 5 million fewer than boomers. This is an incredibly important point. Gen X is a smaller generation than the surrounding generations. It's the valley in between the mountains of millennials and boomers. You'll see that in a second. This really shaped the way the generation acts and behaves. Really, really interesting. They are projected to outnumber boomers by 1 million in the year 2028, right? So boomers, you have a few more years of dominance over Gen X, and then 2028 and never to recover, right? So 2028, Gen X will surpass boomers for the rest of time. Why is it a bit smaller? Well, because fewer of these folks were born, but also fewer of their parents' generation were born. So if you look at this graph, it's a little fuzzy, my apologies. If you look at birth rates over time, you see in the Great Depression into World War II, you had fewer children being born. You had a lot of married couples who were separated during World War II, right? Have the baby boom, that's that big mountain in the middle, and then energy crisis, right? So what happens here? You have fewer children in the 30s who have fewer children in the 70s, 30s and 40s, into the 70s. So baby boomers end in about 1964, 65, I believe. And so you have the folks that weren't born in 45 are not having babies in 1967, right? So very simple. One of the nice things about demographics is, unlike stock market or other performance, it is extremely predictable. So we can actually understand how many folks will be 63 next year, as an example. Really, really interesting. Just to give you a sense of this, how many folks were born in the United States in each generation? And by the way, I know a lot of you are in Canada. Numbers are sort of similar proportionally in Canada, obviously a little bit different in scale. Silence, 47 million. Boomers, 76 million, holy cow. Gen X, smaller, 55 million, because their parents generate, there are fewer parents that have fewer children. Millennials, 62 million. You saw birth rates going down, and yet there were so many parents there that you actually have 62 million. So what defines Gen X? They were born when fertility rates began to decline, when more women enter the workforce. The 1970s were known as the cult of the adult versus the 1950s, which was called the cult of the child. They're also known as the latchkey generation. Latchkey, for those of you that are Gen Z and might not know this term, it means you let yourself in after school because both of your parents were working, right? That's what that means. The more educated the parents, the more likely they were to be quote unquote latchkey kids to working families, right? A lot of folks did. I know some folks that were sort of raised at the library, right? They had to go to the library after school until their parents could come home from work. They were more educated than previous generations, as were their parents. 35% of Gen X has a bachelor's degree or higher, compared to only 10% of silent generation. I mean, it's really striking how few people went to college as of the 30s. And then in boomers, right, these are folks who were born up until 64. Only 25% of boomers, 1 in every 4, has a bachelor's degree. Millennials is up to 40%. Gen Z, great job. You guys are the first generation to cross 50% of you are likely to have a bachelor's degree. Last generation where pursuing higher education was broadly financially rewarding. Not to say it isn't for other folks, just not to the same degree. Really interesting. They were the first generation also when more women than men received degrees, and women have not looked back since. They vastly outstrip American men in college degrees at every level. Fewer marriages and children. So they're part of a decline in marriage and parenthood rates. 57% of Gen X was married between the ages of 25 and 37, compared to 67% of boomers. 62% of Gen X women gave birth between 22 and 37, compared to 64% of boomers, so just a slight decrease. One of the more striking differences is how many kids they had, right? So boomers tended to have more children than Gen X, even though they often had children as well. They are an entrepreneurial generation. They drove the dot-com boom. They own the plurality of small businesses. Almost half of all small businesses in America are owned by Gen X. They own the majority of startups. This is a common misconception. You think millennials and Gen Z are starting startups. More startups are run by Gen X. Notable Gen X startup founders: Jack Dorsey, Larry Page and Sergey from Google, Jeff Bezos, Elon. The 2 wealthiest Americans and the 2 wealthiest people on the planet are both Gen X. Now, I was thinking about this morning, too late to make it into the slides, but I had a thought about this, right? Why is Gen X so entrepreneurial? Now, there's one obvious answer, and folks can feel free to guess, by the way, in the chat. I'd be curious for your view. Um, why is Gen X so entrepreneurial? Well, the easy answer is they were sort of young and around when the internet came to be. Tech boom. David Warren says tech boom. Um, Interesting thoughts that I actually hadn't considered. Jenna, lots of times to ourselves as kid exploring ideas. Maggie, independent kids. Andre or Michelle, more independent. Really interesting. Now, I think there's one other dynamic at play. This is not necessarily important to do with fundraising, but I think it's just very interesting. Let's, recall how large the boomer population was compared to the silent generation before and compared to the Gen X. Now, let's just say I'm part of a small generation following a large generation compared to a large generation following a small generation. Well, if I'm part of a boomers, then it's actually very appealing to go work for a company like IBM because I see there aren't that many folks who are 10 years older than me taking up all the leadership roles. But if I'm Gen X, I look above me and there's so many people who are 10 years older than I am, and they're probably going to hang on to a lot of those leadership roles forever. So I'm going to have to go start my own company to be in charge. Now, really interesting dynamic how these might play out. There's plenty of other reasons, but there's some interesting different dynamics, right? Really, there's a saying that demographics is destiny. And I'd be surprised if it didn't at least contribute to the entrepreneurship of Gen X. All right, so continuing on, they sort of rose to political and social consciousness during the Reagan era, which is very different than rising in the Kennedy era or the Obama era, similar. They grew up during the 80s recession and the Cold War when federal debt tripled. You see more folks than Gen X are very conscious of federal debt. There was an increased focus on defense programs. There were cuts to domestic aid. I don't know if this sounds familiar. The crack and AIDS epidemic during formative years. They saw an increase in crime. They saw an anti-drug laws, which had some catastrophic effects. They saw an increase in the prison population. They tend to be more skeptical of government involvement compared to millennials, right? And you really see this, right? So the folks, there's a lot of Gen Xers in charge of Doge, and they're very involvement compared to other populations as well. Now, this is all on average, by the way, so don't feel unfairly painted if you're a Gen Xer. This is just sort of broad across the board. Now, what was their life like? Let's sort of dive in and everyone just, some of you are, you live this life, so you can sort of take a minute off or you can just reminisce. But for the rest of us, let's sort of put ourselves in the shoes of the life of a typical American Gen Xer. So we're born in 1973. Fertility rates are in decline. It's the peak of the oil crisis. At 2 years old, the Vietnam War ends. We don't really remember it, although our parents may have fought in it. At age 8, Ronald Reagan assumes office. At age 9, or rather, he's elected in 81. Is that right? I think he would have been elected in, you're right, that's correct. Sorry, 81. He was elected in 80, assumes office in 81. 82, unemployment hits 11%. This is bad. I mean, really strong high unemployment in the 80s. 84, right? You can imagine a bunch of young Bezos, young Elons, young other folks getting the first Apple Macintosh in 84. Run DMC also becomes the first platinum selling hip hop group, right? Brooklyn's most worldly export is hip hop. Age 16, the Berlin Wall falls and marks the unofficial end of the Cold War. So you're 16 years old, right? You're watching this on television and the Berlin Wall falls. At 18, it's 1991. It's the 42-day Persian Gulf War, and CDs overtake cassettes for the first time. Age 20, you start to hear that little dial-up sound, and AOL gains popularity, and the internet goes mainstream. 21, Kurt Cobain, lead singer of Nirvana, dies by suicide. He personified the grunge music trend exported from Jenny's home in Seattle. Age 27, the dot-com bubble bursts. Age 28, 9/11 happens. You're 28 years old where we start to get cell phones everywhere. Beginning of the war in Afghanistan. Age 34, the first iPhone is released. You're suddenly adopting to new technology on the fly. Smartphones quickly become ubiquitous. 34, it's the Great Recession. Housing crisis hits. 35, the first Black president of your lifetime. 37, the thing that got you through your teenage years and your college years goes bankrupt in Blockbuster. Age 42, right? You might have been a gay American and during your entire life, so, gay marriage was illegal. And then at 42, that changes. Age 47, COVID hits. You're sort of in the high point of your career. First female VP or president is elected. Age 51, second ever president elected twice to non-consecutive terms after our old friend Grover Cleveland, right? And that's your life so far. So that's what it looks like for roughly a 52-year-old Gen Xer. When we asked you, what percentage of your donor base is Gen X? Look, the big chunk of you says it's between a quarter and a half. This is a really meaningful component. Fully 20% say more than half of all of our donors are Gen X. So this is an incredibly important part of the organization. Very similar numbers looking at total fundraising dollars, right? So very, very big chunks. Sorry, that is fundraising dollars. Major donors, right? Your major donors, 29% say a quarter to a half. Another 12% say more than half. So you see really big chunks of our major donors are Gen X as well. So how does Gen X give? This is an understudied topic because so many people focus on boomers. So much of this sort of training that's happened has been focused on older donors historically. How does Gen X give? Well, first of all, they're very generous, right? So they sort of got a little bit of a stereotype as a selfish generation. Turns out that's totally false. 59% of Gen X donates to charity. This accounts for 20% of all charitable giving dollars. And by the way, it's only going up. In comparison, boomers account for 41%, millennials give 11%. Now, all of that is going to change over time, but interesting, boomers twice as much as Gen X twice as much as millennials. Millennials probably twice as much as Gen Z, if not more. They're the most generous with their time. So 36% of Gen X volunteer more than any other generation, even more than baby boomers. They go online to give. Gen X is more likely to give online than older donors, not as likely as younger donors. 69% of Gen X give online. This is up 8 points from 2016. Boomers, 58%. Millennials, 82%. 43% of Gen X uses their smartphone to donate online, compared to 27% of boomers and 54% of millennials, right? So you see them closer to millennials than to boomers in this behavior. They give with intention. They're very deliberate about how they give. According to QGive's 2024 report, nearly 76% of Gen Xers research a nonprofit before making a gift. And this impact matters to Gen X, right? So they really want to see, what are you doing with the money? How is it being used? How is it going to cause impact on the areas that are most important to me? Gen X donors are less likely to give if they're not sure how it will be used. You all remember what's it called? Donors Choose and how that blew up. That was a lot of Gen X donors. And you can see very similar behavior in other areas of giving. They are hitting their stride. So if you've ever thought about getting smarter about Gen X donors, and you probably are based on the fact that you are here, this is an incredibly important moment for that. So look, there are 3 big ways to become wealthy enough to become a major donor. What are they? First, you $1.13 million on the average Gen Xers. Remember, though, these are the sandwich generation, right? Some of you will have experienced this or are experiencing this right now. A micro generation who is shouldering the caregiving of aging parents while still financially supporting their children. Retirement, debt, cost of living are all major stressors for this group. This can help us understand Gen Xers' motivation for understanding the financial impact of giving. Money is not abundant, or it is abundant, but we also have lots of stresses here as well. Some of you are in this category. And look, we know this is a hard place to be. So I'm just going to name it as well. Catherine Lauren says this as well. Now, note, some of these folks are beginning to age out of the micro generation. How do you get out of the sandwich generation? Not in a positive way sometimes. Your parents pass away, right? That is a thing that happens to folks who are 50s and 60s and 40s, et cetera. But meanwhile, what else is happening to folks who are 50 and 60 is their children, if they have children, are becoming financially independent, right? So suddenly these 2 things might be happening at the same time, and your financial picture changes very quickly if both of those dependencies shift right around here, right? Heather says she feels this in her soul. A lot of folks are here as well. Key insights to consider. So first of all, Gen X is in their peak earning years. They were hit hard by the '07 recession, but they have fully recovered. They've moved into later stages of their career. They're in higher earning positions. Now, those of you that were with us in the boomer presentation, what did we talk about? We talked about peak 65. What does that mean? It means that there are more people retiring right now than ever before at any point in American history. So what does that mean? It means Gen X, in many cases, is stepping into the most senior roles because the folks in those roles are retiring. So really interesting as well. They make up just 25% of the population, but they make up 31% of all income. Gen X boasts the highest overall income compared with other generations. No surprise. Almost all of Gen X is still working, at least those that have chosen to work in their careers. And so they're higher income than millennials, and they're less retired than boomers. So these are the folks bringing in the most money. Now, secondly, on assets, as of 2024, 73% of Gen X are homeowners, and homeowner wealth is a big deal. Pandemic, low interest rates drove a huge housing boom that benefited them financially. Many locked in historically low interest rates during the 2000s and 2010s, so they're still paying off homes at 2 and 3% mortgages. Good for you all. Over the past year, they've seen a 10% increase in home equity, and they now own 29% of US household net wealth compared to 17% in 2017. This is a very big deal. Assets, right? These are savers, they are investors, they are savvy. Recall that they are more educated than their predecessors. And despite recent market turmoil, the average return over the last 10 years was 10%. This is unbelievable. A great period over the last 10 years in the market. S&P is currently sitting at where it was before, quote unquote, Liberation Day. There's been a lot of clawbacks in the market there. 38% of Gen X own stock. They hold 22% of the total market, which is valued at $10 trillion, 10, capital T, trillion. Karen says she just paid off her house a few months ago. Congratulations. That is a huge accomplishment. Let's take a look here, right? Look at boomers. You see that boomers, tons of stock wealth, right? So just a reminder, we should be asking for stock gifts everywhere, right? I'm going to say this again, ask for stock gifts everywhere. Look at this list, right? You tally this up and we're looking at something like 45 to 50 trillion dollars of stock wealth. But you can see Gen X, it has just surpassed silent generation earlier to have tremendous wealth here. Millennials, look at the millennial number. 2016 was close to nothing comparatively, and it's really shot up over the last decade or last 7 or 8 years. So interesting there. But look, boomers, big deal. You can also see this is the wealth that's going to be inherited. They are going to, now Gen X, we talk a lot about millennials inheriting the great wealth transfer. That is true, but Gen X is going to inherit portions of it earlier. An estimated 124 trillion is expected to change hands through 2048. The latest report says that 85 trillion will be passed down to millennial and Gen X heirs. The greatest amount in the next 10 years. Millennials will inherit more after that. That will be another 14 capital T trillion. Big deal. Andre has stock instructions on the back of my business card, which makes Andre my favorite fundraiser of the week. Great job, Andre. It is so important. If you are not extremely comfortable asking for stock gifts and other asset gifts, make it your goal for the year, or better yet, make it your goal for the month. This is the most important skill to have as a fundraiser over the next few years. Back on inheritances. This will make Gen X and millennials great major prospects virtually overnight, because they're inheriting so much money, right? So this is a very big difference here as well. A generation in transition. Gen X is the middle of some big life transitions. They're getting older, they're caring for aging parents, they're paying off debt, etc. Many of these folks will be hiding in your annual funder or your mid-level donor list. They might be entirely off your radar. They might be new to philanthropy. Their giving capacity is quickly growing, and soon they will become your new major donors, but you have to find them. They're also, again, they're fiscally savvy. They care a lot about saving on taxes. They're the most likely to care about tax-friendly gifts. Say it with me, asset-based gifts, non-cash gifts are the most tax-friendly. A December 2024 study by our friends at Giving USA found that among adults who said they would most likely increase their giving if a deduction for their gifts was possible, 50% of Gen X said they'd give up to 50% more. 21% said they give between half and 100% more, and 10% said they would more than double their gift. The fastest way to increase giving from Gen X is to change the way they give and focus on the most tax advantaged ways to give, which will be, for this group, stock giving, crypto giving, smaller portion, but crypto did hit 100,000 recently again, and donor advised funds. You can see the data here. You can see how it breaks down. What do we see here? We see that Gen X is the most interested in tax-savvy giving. So if you don't have your tax-savvy giving program up to speed, we don't mean cash giving, which for 90% of Americans offers no tax benefit. We mostly mean non-cash giving, stocks, mutual funds, QCDs for older donors, donor advised fund gifts, cryptocurrency, asset-based gifts. Very, very, very important. 42% of Gen X view gifts tax deductibility as a big motivator to give. If you can connect with Gen X with tax-friendly ways to give, you will have a much bigger impact. This is your path to success here. Guiding these donors to give stock, crypto, DAF grants instead of cash will help them save on capital gains taxes. They will appreciate you. They will give more to your organization, and they will give more frequently to your organization. Incredibly important. How do we do this? How do we secure more major gifts from Gen X? First, we are going to remind donors of matching gifts. Remember, virtually entirely employed. They're reaching their peak earning years. Many of these folks work for companies that match charitable gifts. If you know your donors' employers, ask them to submit a gift for a match. If you don't, you can still ask about matching. Thank you so much for your gift. You may already know this, but many employers match their employers' charitable contributions. If your employer has a matching gift program, help us double your impact by submitting your gift for a match today. Please forget this, or please don't forget this, excuse me. 2, make sure your website isn't built for retirees. Now, what did we just say? Gen X is working. Most of them are working normal hours, 9 to 5. Some of them are not. But let's sort of take for a moment, presuming you're a 9 to 5 worker like yourself. This group is growing their wealth, but they're not retired, and much of their giving is going to happen on nights and weekends when they're not working. But what happens sometimes, you say, oh, we'd love for you to give us a gift of stock. Please contact Lydia at 313-615-4231, or whatever the number is. What does that mean? Lydia is not picking up the phone on nights or weekends. And so suddenly I give them a call, they don't answer, and now suddenly we're out of a major stock gift. So you want to make sure it's as easy as possible for them to take action when it is easy for them and not easy for you, right? We're working to support this as well. Here's a great example. Thank you so much. Oops, let's go back to this. From the Cure Blindness Project, who does, by the way, just outstanding work across the board. But it turns out that they're also very good at fundraising. And so you see on this beautiful website, they have Explore Tax Smart gift options. You can learn more about gifts that maximize your impact while providing tax benefits to you, stocks and securities, donor advised funds, crypto, and more, right? So go check out this page. It's very good. Great organization, but also very effective fundraisers. So shout out to the Cure Blindness Project. Tip 3, encourage stock and DAF gifts. So we've talked about this. They are looking for tax-friendly ways to give. Don't take our word for it. Go look at the research data that we showed a few slides ago. Gifts of stock may be the most tax advantageous because they help donors avoid capital gains, and they empower donors to give a larger gift than they would in cash. Now, just to explain this very quickly, let's say that I'm giving a gift of stock that is highly appreciated. Now, if I gave $10,000 in cash, if I itemize deductions, I would get a tax deduction, but I might not be itemizing deductions. If I give it in stock and I bought that gift for I bought that stock for $2,000 10 years back, well, now I'm paying capital gains on $8,000. I might be paying state income taxes on that as well. But if I donate it, in many states, I get a full state income tax deduction and I get a full federal income tax deduction for the value of that. So I can plausibly save more than 50% of the in taxes. It's a huge win, and it means we're giving larger gifts. In fact, the research, thank you, Allison, by the way. Allison out of nowhere just says, we love working with FreeWill. Patrick and the entire team are dynamite. Allison, we think you're dynamite. Thank you so much. But back to this, the research shows that organizations who focus on non-cash gifts grow their fundraising by 5 to 6 times compared to organizations that don't. This is an enormous deal. It is probably the most important research in modern American fundraising. So be ready for some very large gifts. Now, some of you are asking, hey, I live in Winnipeg. I live in Prince Edward Island. I live in London, or I live in Sydney. Is this true for me? Well, taxes and tax deductibility and all those things change, obviously, based on where you are. But what doesn't change is the psychological benefits of referring to assets, which anchor people in larger gifts. So I would still encourage you to think about this, even if you are outside the United States. And I know sometimes you feel like we are overly US centered on these conversations. So I just wanted to make sure we get that point as well. On a scale of 1 to 5, we asked you, how well do you think your Gen X donors understand to give stock or DAFs? And we're getting roughly 2.7, which means not very much. So it is our collective responsibility to be educating donors on these. DAFs are one of the fastest growing forms of charitable giving. There is more than $250 billion, again, capital T trillion, sitting in donor advised funds right now. They are the perfect gift for Gen Xers because they offer flexibility and tax savings without affecting cash flow. And by the way, a donor whom you've identified as having a donor advised fund account is worth their weight in gold. How do you, people always ask, how do I figure out which of my donors has a donor advised fund account? Very simple. Ask them to give out of their donor advised fund account. Once they do, you've identified it as something going forward. Many Gen Xers already hold DAFs through financial advisors or employer-sponsored programs. So we want to actively encourage these folks to give from their DAFs. This will unlock larger, more consistent giving. Make it very clear that we accept and encourage DAFs by including information in one-on-one outreach, in appeals on your website. If you ever go to freewill.com/nonprofits, we have a lot of examples there as well. What else is good about DAFs? Let's go back to the sandwich generation challenge. Many DAF holders involve their family in charitable giving decisions. They often treat DAFs like family foundations. Some boomers may be including their Gen X children in their DAF giving. Others meaning their children as successor advisors on their DAF accounts to carry philanthropy on when they're gone. It is a great moment to involve the whole family. If you already have older donors giving from DAFs, consider asking them. Many families treat their DAF as a shared philanthropic effort. I'm curious, do your kids participate in your DAF giving decisions? Have you named a family member as a successor trustee for DAF? If yes, and if it ever feels appropriate, we'd be honored to get to know them. And we can better explain the impact that you've had on the mission. So wouldn't it be great to sit with the donor and their kids and say, look, we just want to tell you about all the impact mom and dad have had over the years. That way, if mom and dad pass on at some point, we can continue the relationship with the donors who are inheriting control of the DAFs, not inheriting the money, but inheriting control of the DAFs as well. Now, we want to spot some hidden Gen X major donors. So, sometimes our major donors are obvious. They're the folks giving us $10,000 every year. But the potential major donors might be hidden. So if you have a donor in their 40s and 50s, now we know they're on the rise economically. Maybe they've been given $250 or $500 a year, but they're not really getting any effort from your gift officers. This is more valuable than a boomer giving the same amount because that person may not be on the rise economically. So let's pay extra attention to our Gen X donors who are giving regularly, but also let's look for rising giving. If someone gave 100 5 years ago, and then 200, 300, 400, 500, those aren't going to be flagged as major donors, but it sounds like they have the real possibility that will continue to go up. So go check that out. If you have age data, pull a list of Gen X mid-level donors, and please take a closer look there. These are great prospects to level up their giving, and a tax-smart gift could be what catalyzes their leap to a major donor. Just as a pro tip, go send the permanent giving guide as a quick, straightforward way of educating them on how to make a bigger impact without making a lot more. What you see here is a permanent giving guide brochure. So we have an ability to create a text version of this for free at willy.freewill.com, which is a great AI tool we love, and we need it. So I'll just say that. But for those of you that are FreeWill partners, there is a more visually designed component in your portal. So it's a little bit challenging for us to make that publicly available, but for partners, go check that out. It is a great thing to hand to donors. A couple of things I want to point out on why this is one of the sort of strongest innovations from our team, what we call the permanent giving guide. You see this headline. It says, please keep this guide for future reference. It is designed to be held onto. The idea is that this is helpful for any of your giving, not just giving to our organization, any of your giving. So we're holding on to this and we're guiding people through smart giving, the benefits of X or Y or Z, really important. And the folks that are using this report a lot of success. Tip 6, counterintuitively, it may be the perfect time to introduce planned giving to Gen X. They're in a period of transition, so there's new plans to be made. These are powerful catalysts for estate planning, and it's an opportune time to get these folks engaged in plan giving conversations. Now, FreeWill's 2024 Plan Giving Report found that folks in middle age, right, now, unfortunately, for better or worse, Gen X, you are middle age, they're increasingly engaging in estate planning. 45 to 64, not quite Gen X, but close to it, accounted for 38% of will makers. 20% of these folks included a bequest commitment to charity. So super, super, super important. Kimberly says, by the way, she says, we used FreeWill Smart Giving Suite. We executed a campaign last summer. We saw a significant increase in planned giving and non-cash giving. Kimberly, good for you. It's just great to hear. If you capture these bequests, right, so we're getting planned giving commitments, but we also know there's some really interesting research that shows once you make a planned gift, your giving goes up by nearly 75% in real-time giving. Super, super helpful. Plus, it identifies your strongest supporters and often their asset levels. So we might find out that someone is sitting on millions of dollars in assets that we didn't know about, but now we know they love us and they have a lot of resources. So this is a huge win. This should be going out to all of your supporters. It's very important that we're not doing age-dependent plan giving. You want folks from 18 and over to make these gifts. Couple big moments, January, August. August is coming up. If you don't have your Make a Will Month plans, make them over the next few weeks. Really, really important. October, National Estate Planning Awareness Week, but please make sure you have August plans. Super important. Tip 7, let's go back to this idea that millennials and boomers are large generations and Gen X is small. Demographics are destiny. As boomers age and pass away, there is simply not enough Gen Xers to make up for the lost giving. And so while we are increasing our gifts from Gen Xers, we also need to make sure that we're getting planned gifts from baby boomers. And that cultivation needs to start now. You don't want to risk a shrinking donor base, shrinking revenue, and ultimately shrinking impact and shrinking jobs at your nonprofit. So it's imperative that we nail the planned giving during the Great Wealth Transfer. Bequest can help bridge the gap from boomers to millennials, while we also push up our giving from Gen X, right? This is a very important component as well. Bonus tip, some of you will recognize the album cover on the right from the Buggles. Is that how you pronounce it? Bugles, Buggles? Someone help me out who is Gen X. First video on MTV. Thank you, Ashley. That's a really important point. First ever music video. Okay, Nick says it's Buggles. So the Buggles. Thank you. So Gen X donors were the first generation to watch the beloved medium, which was music on radio, get eclipsed overnight by a flashier one, right? We want our MTV. For Gen X, visual proof in the form of video is table stakes. They'll skim your email, but a 60-second video that shows the projects before and after will hit harder, right? Keep it short, keep it informal and fun. You need to be enjoying it, right? You can, this is obviously gonna be a little different if you're doing sort of emergency foreign aid, but if you're at a museum or even if you're at a hospital, hey, let's check out some of the cool new things happening in the hospital, right? Informal video goes a really long way with this group as well as it does with millennials. And it will really generate a lot more of an emotional connection and more giving. So please check that out. Thank you, Lori, for getting the Sting reference. I really appreciate you. All right, so we are going to pause there. We're going to answer a couple of questions. But as we pause there, my colleague Kara in the chat, which is going to be the survey. Let me know if you can do that, Kara. And what this will be is a survey to fill out, A, for the book. Thank you so much. That link is in there now. So if you haven't already, go to those little thought bubbles, speech bubbles, click on the chat. All the way at the bottom is a link. Click that link. And first thing in the survey is we're going to send a copy of Generations by Dr. Jean. I already got corrected. Twangy. I think. Someone help me out. Dr. Jean Twangy, to 20 people as a gift. Apologies to Dr. Jean for ruining her name. Make a note at the end of the survey, if you'd like a copy, and please do as well. Second thing, we are doing an innovation showcase on Thursday. This is not a tool called Grant Assistant. It will help you write a winning grant in a third or less of the time. It is on Thursday. It'll be about half an hour. Please, please, please come check this out. If your organization gets any grants, whether they foundation or government, state or local, come join this. In fact, I'm going to read you just a paragraph that just came in on a story that is the top story right now on the Chronicle of Philanthropy's website. The headline of the story is "Nonprofits are turning to AI to save time and money" by the reporter Rashida Childress. Dated 5/13, which is today. I'm going to read you 2 paragraphs of it, 3 paragraphs. Organizations are experimenting with ways technology can help craft grant proposals, analyze donor data, improve programs, and more. Then it continues. Beth Zimmerman doesn't have a lot of free time. She is one of just 3 people on the staff of the small nonprofit she founded, Pets for Patriots. So as executive director, she is also responsible for the group's fundraising. In the past, Zimmerman would spend multiple days working on each grant the group applied for. Grant writing is extremely tedious, very time-consuming, very gut-wrenching activity, Zimmerman says. Once, she spent 9 hours over 2 days working on one grant. I don't have 9 hours a day to devote to just one grant. Frankly, I think I'd rather have a root canal most days than write a grant, says Beth. So she turned to Grant Assistant, an AI tool for grant writing, and estimates it has cut the amount of time she spends on grant applications by 80 to 90%. Zimmerman isn't alone. Many nonprofit staff are turning to AI as their organizations have to do even more with less funding because of federal budget cuts and increased competitions. Grant writing isn't the only thing nonprofits are using AI for, and then it continues. So really interesting stuff. So please come join us for that. We'll dive in there. We'll talk about how to be thoughtful with AI. We'll talk about how to be useful with it. We'll talk about ultimately how to generate a lot more money and get your nights and weekends back for those of you that are cramming all the time on grant deadlines. So please come check that out. All right, wrapping up, we are going to ask you one more time to fill out the survey. In 2 weeks, our next session is we have some breakthrough research that we're doing right now on donor advised funds. So we'll give you the first look at what's happening in donor advised funds right now. And we'll be releasing that on May 27th at noon, and also have some very practical tips for making the most of donor advised fund gifts in 2025. So we'd love to have you there. If separately you need anything at all, you want to talk about other FreeWill products, you just want to say hi, just email me at patrick@freewill.com or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find. But overall, I just want to say thank you so much. Will it be relevant to Canadians as well, Jen? Yes, it should be helpful as well. So please come join that if you need anything else. And we'll just close by saying thank you so much for being here. First of all, thank you especially for the Gen Xers for all you're doing. We know that you toil in obscurity as a Gen Xer and that there's not enough attention paid to you as donors, as other things in the world. So shout out to our Gen X friends. Second of all, thank you all for just understanding how important this topic is and coming to spend an hour with us. It means so much. We know how busy you are. And so the fact that you're giving up some time to come hang out with us for a little bit means a ton. Thank you, Kara, and thank you, Phoebe and Abstentia, for all the work you put into all this. And thank you for the whole FreeWill team, who obviously really puts their shoulder in every day and tries to deliver amazing outcomes for so many nonprofits. So have a wonderful rest of the week. I'll see many of you on Thursday. So please, if you can try to make it, you can also send other folks from your team, but that will be very, very cool. And with that, I will pause and just tell you to have a great day across the board. So thanks again for joining, and see you all soon.